absolutely believe the time has come, and it is true. The question is, are we willing? Are we willing to embrace and reimagine a new church, or a church in a new way, relevant to the contemporary times of Australia and of Australians? I think what we've seen in the church as it operates within the Australian context is this very stark difference between what we see in the parish-based churches, and that related to worship, and what we've seen is the flourishing in ministries within health, education, community services. And what that's clearly demonstrated is that there is a learning to be had from the expansion and development of those ministries, which are largely driven by the leadership of lay people. And some of those learnings now need to be taken across to the way in which we operate parish and dioceses, and how we encourage lay leadership across and within the whole of the church. I think those learnings are now so clear that the time has come to reflect on why we have this very great difference within church, what are the learnings from all the areas of church, but more importantly, the lay leadership of the church now is in a position where it seeks to share its wisdom with other leaders in the church, but also it's critical that that wisdom is in fact shared. So I genuinely believe that time has come. It is unquestionably true that in many ways the Catholic faithful believe that they have been betrayed. They believe that the unfulfilled promises of the Vatican Council remain exactly that. The unfulfilled promises and the unfulfilled hopes remain elusive. The Second Vatican Council was not only an opportunity to reform, but it was also an event in the life of the faithful. It was an event that said to the faithful that from here on in, you will be an equal participant in the full life of the church. And that's been reflected in many statements, but also even in the some parts of the canon law that came about in 1987. On the ground, however, whilst there was the establishment of new ministries and much greater active participation by laity in many of those ministries, the fundamental structures, the fundamental balance of powers, the fundamental use of power and privilege did not change. And those systems and structures that failed to change have in fact gradually whittled away much that was expected of and promised with the Vatican Council. Now, it is true that some of those expectations were unrealistic. It is true that some people misinterpreted what was to flow from the Vatican Council. But what was very clear is that many of the faithful do not believe that the leadership of the Church that followed the Vatican Council fulfilled that promise. And part of that promise was to genuinely engage the laity in the active ministry of the Church, and I believe the co-responsibility for the future of the Church. Now, this is not about democratising the Church, but it is to actually say that the laity, the religious, the ordained ministers, have an equal and important part in the Church, in the responsibilities for the Church and in its future. And so in a sense going forward, are we as Church ready to trust ourselves? Are leaders of Church, including all of those present here today, willing to genuinely trust those that make up the whole fraternity of the Catholic Church? For without trust there will be no change. Without trust there will be no future. For a very long time, most of the faithful, broadly defined, believed that their role was subservient to other leaders, to the pastor. And for many that took a long time to realise that in fact that was not only an old model, but a completely and utterly inappropriate model. Christ in fact founded the Church based on the disciples and many others. He trusted in people. He trusted effectively in the laity. So following Vatican II, but many other things, the laity have gradually started to believe that they have a capacity for and a right and an obligation to participate in the life of the Church. But the structures and the systems often do not permit that to occur. What the laity now need to do is to reassert their trust and belief in themselves, in conjunction with the ordained ministers, but to actually believe that they do have this right and role. They have to trust themselves and they have to trust each other, that they can in fact fulfil what I call this unfulfilled promise arising from the Second Vatican Council. But I think we now know that they can do it. We now know through the ministries that are represented in human services and other areas that the laity can in fact take on those roles and responsibilities. So this is not about an idea. This is learning from reflective practice over recent years. It is extraordinary to me that we have very formal structures for bishops, we have councils of priests, and we have institutions for religious, and yet we have nothing for the laity. Nothing. There's no question in my mind that we need to look at the formal structures within church which give a much more active and significant voice to the laity. It is true that we have a whole range of mechanisms by which bishops, ordained ministers and religious can influence the church. There is almost no way that the laity can directly influence other than in a number of very narrowly constrained environments. So there are two things that I think have to happen. The first is there needs to be a new lay movement within the church in the Australian context. What the shape of that is unclear to me, but we need to have a movement that recognises the roles and responsibilities in the special place of laity. Secondly, more formally, we need to encourage the bishops, the Australian bishops, to look at formal mechanisms by which advice from the laity can in fact impact on the way in which the church operates across the nation and obviously within dioceses. Now some dioceses do have structures. Their pastoral councils are very effective. Others, they either don't exist or they're completely and absolutely designed not to have any influence at all other than to simply say that they've got them. And that's not satisfactory. And so today it's a case of optimism. Is this optimism born out of some blind view of the world, rose-coloured view of the world? No, it's not. My basis for optimism is that the Church has been capable of extraordinary movement in relation to the way in which it sees the role of laity. Prior to the Vatican Council, it was very clear that there were two ranks as were described by previous pontiffs. There was the leaders and then there was the flock. In more modern times, and certainly following Vatican II, even the Code of Canon Law shows a position where the laity, together with the ordained ministry, have a co-responsibility for the church. And that is a significant change. Secondly, we actually have seen it in action. In the Australian context, we see what we do when we in fact trust the laity, work with them, create the structures. We see it in the health, education, community services, and a whole range of other areas. So we now know that there are certain things you can do which can enliven aspects of the Catholic Church. The third thing is that the current model, in relation to the way in which dioceses and parishes are working, is not working. Now, it would be very strange for a leader of an organisation, confronted with the actual facts and circumstances, not to reflect on that. So my view is that the leaders, both the bishops, clerical leaders, religious leaders and lay leaders, can come together in a new dialogue that it can actually reshape the way in which the Church operates within the Australian context, learning from each other, informing each other, but most importantly, accepting a co-responsibility for the future of the Church. So my optimism is based on history and the actual need today to do this.